It was a sultry summer afternoon in Baker Street, and the languid air through the half-opened window stirred the papers upon Holmes's desk like reluctant thoughts drifting in idleness. London's hum seemed far below us, and I confess I was feeling the soporific effects of that still heat when the first thread of this curious adventure began to weave itself before our eyes. Holmes reclined upon the couch, his long fingers steepered before his thin face, while his eyes, keen yet distant, wandered absently to the ceiling. I, for my part, had just returned from my morning round and was idly remarking upon the curious persistence of a fever among my patients in the East End.
You observe, Watson, said Holmes, in that quiet tone which somehow never failed to awaken my full attention, how even the humblest epidemic serves to mirror the conditions of life around it. Dirt, overcrowding, ignorance, each contributes its note to the symphony of disease.
And yet, I replied, there are ailments that owe nothing to poverty or squalor. They attack even the most prosperous.
Indeed, Holmes murmured, and those maladies of the mind, of reason disturbed or tampered with, are more fascinating still. To trace the cause of physical contagion is mere labor. To uncover the contagion of the soul, that, my dear Watson, is art.
Before I could answer, Mrs. Hudson entered with a silver tray upon which lay a letter, its envelope of fine cream paper, neatly addressed to Sherlock Holmes, Esq, 221B, Baker Street.
A messenger brought it not 10 minutes ago, Mr. Holmes, said she, placing it upon the table. He said it came from Cambridge, sir.
Cambridge, Holmes repeated, half raising an eyebrow. That promises an intellectual flavor, does it not, Watson?
He tore it open, glanced swiftly over the contents, and then handed it to me without a word. The letter ran thus. Dear Mr. Holmes, I'd beg you would pardon the liberty I take in addressing you, but the matter upon which I desire your opinion is one of extreme delicacy and distress. It concerns my father, Professor Presbury of Cambridge, whose behavior during the past month has become most alarming. I am at my wits' end and have heard that you are the one man in England who can throw light upon inexplicable things. Should you consent to an interview, I would wait upon you at your convenience.
Yours faithfully, Professor Bennett.
Professor Presbury, I said, surely that is the eminent physiologist whose papers upon nerve degeneration are so widely quoted?
The same, said Holmes, a man of 61, a fellow of the Royal Society, and one whose intellect might serve as a model for his students. It would indeed be a strange irony, Watson, if such a man were now himself the subject of mental derangement.
The letter suggested, does it not?
Suggests, yes, but does not prove. The Sun speaks of alarming behavior, which may mean anything from eccentricity to lunacy. Still, there is something in the tone, a young man's desperation restrained by education, which makes me curious. Mrs. Hudson, if the messenger waits, bid him inform Mr. Bennet that we shall receive him at 4.
Yes, Mr. Holmes, said she, and departed.
Holmes took his violin from its case, and as his bow drew a low, meditative strain, I watched the sharp lines of his face soften into abstraction. For an hour he played thus, and I, from my chair by the window, mused upon the possible shape of this new riddle, a great scientist, grey and honoured, suddenly behaving as though some demon of folly had seized him. When the clock struck 4, the bell below rang promptly. A few minutes later, a tall, earnest-looking young man was ushered in, Mr. Trevor Bennet, as he announced himself, clean-shaven, scholarly, with an anxious expression which spoke more plainly than words of sleepless nights and heavy fears.
Mr. Holmes, said he, bowing, I thank you for seeing me upon so short a notice. I come to you because I can think of no other quarter to which I may turn.
Pray be seated, Mr. Bennet, said Holmes, indicating the armchair opposite. You are yourself a student of science, I perceive.
I am Professor Presbury's assistant, sir, in his physiological laboratory. For 5 years I have had the honor of working under him.
Then you will understand that exactness of detail is the soul of all inquiry. Tell me, as clearly as you can, what you have observed.
It began some weeks ago, said the young man, leaning forward earnestly. The professor had lately returned from Prague, where he went, so he said, to consult a colleague upon certain researches. When he came back, I thought him strangely altered. He was irritable, secretive, and subject to sudden bursts of excitement quite foreign to his nature.
Excitement, you say? I asked. Of what kind? Of what kind?
A curious, almost animal vigor, replied Bennet. His step grew lighter, his eye brighter, yet his manner, I scarcely know how to describe it, seemed furtive. He would lock himself in a study for hours, and once I surprised him leaping from the window into the garden at night, like a boy escaping from school.
Ames leaned forward, his eyes alight with interest. You are sure, Mr. Bennet, that there was no intruder? No external cause for such behavior?
None, sir. It was the professor himself. When I ventured to question him, he flew into a passion such as I had never seen before. Later, he apologized, said that he was nervous and overworked. But the strangeness continued. He avoids his daughter, Miss Edith, would not permit her to enter his room, and his dog, a faithful wolfhound named Roy, has become violently hostile toward him, though once the creature adored him.
A dog's antipathy is often more significant than a man's suspicion, murmured Holmes. You mentioned a journey to Prague. Did he bring back any parcel or correspondence from abroad?
Yes, a small box which he keeps locked in his bureau. I once saw him open it and take from it a little phial containing a colorless fluid. He hid it instantly when he perceived me.
A chemical of some kind, no doubt, I suggested.
Possibly, said Holmes, but we must not conclude too soon. Mr. Bennet, does your employer exhibit any physical symptoms? Tremors, change in complexion, irregularities of pulse, or the like?
None, except perhaps an unnatural agility. Once, when I entered suddenly, he sprang upon a table as lightly as a cat. It was, forgive me, grotesque.
Grotesque indeed, said Holmes thoughtfully. And his age is 61. You see the significance, Watson? The energy of youth grafted upon the infirmity of age, an unnatural combination.
It might suggest some stimulant, I said, but no ordinary one could produce such an effect.
Quite so. We must learn what lies within that locked box. Mr. Bennet, do you think Miss Presbury could assist us?
She is deeply distressed, sir, but she loves her father and fears to expose him to ridicule. Yet I'm certain she would do anything to restore him.
Then we must pay her a visit. You will return to Cambridge tomorrow, and Dr. Watson and I shall follow by the morning train. Say nothing of our coming. The fewer who know, the better. In the meantime, take care that the professor is not left alone with the dog. Animals have an unerring instinct for what is abnormal.
Indeed, sir, I shall. Only last night, Roy sprang at him with such fury that it required all my strength to drag the creature off.
That is a circumstance we shall not overlook. Good evening, Mr. Bennet. You have done wisely in coming.
When our visitor had departed, Holmes sat long in silence, his chin upon his hands and his eyes fixed upon the fire. You are pondering something strange, Holmes, I ventured.
Strange indeed, Watson. Here we have an elderly scientist returning from the continent with a secret mixture, his intellect sound, his body rejuvenated, his habits bestial, his dog in revolt. What single thread runs through these phenomena? The answer must lie either in that phial or in the Prague connection.
Do you suspect some form of drug?
A drug, or a discovery so perilous that it verges upon the forbidden. Mark me, Watson, when man attempts to accelerate his own evolution, he risks awakening the animal that slumbers within. We may be standing at the threshold of a scientific horror.
And thus, upon that warm evening in Baker Street, began the case which Holmes was afterward to entitle The Adventure of the Creeping Man, a tale in which science, ants, secrecy, and the shadowed border between man and beast was strangely interwoven. The following morning dawned grey and cool. The skies above London veiled in that misty softness which always heralds the coming of autumn. Holmes was already astir when I descended from my room. His breakfast lay untasted beside a pile of reference volumes, and the blue smoke of his pipe rose like incense before the altar of his intellect. A telegram, half crumpled, rested upon the table.
Good morning, Watson, said he, without lifting his eyes. Our friend Mr. Bennet has wired that the professor is at home and unsuspecting. We shall take the 9:15 train from King's Cross to Cambridge. I presume your medical bag is ready?
The letter was the as ever, Holmes, I replied. But may I ask, what medical aid do you anticipate needing upon this occasion?
Only the kind that soothes the mind, my dear Watson, said he with a faint smile. How? For when we arrive, we shall walk among the nerves of science itself, stretched, frayed, and vibrating with perilous curiosity.
We breakfasted swiftly and took a cab through the glistening streets. The air smelled of rain upon cobblestones, and the clang of hooves echoed like a metronome to Holmes's restless tapping fingers. The train bore us northward, through the flat green stretches of the English countryside, until at last the spires and colleges of Cambridge broke the horizon, serene in their ancient dignity. Mr. Trevor Bennet awaited us upon the platform. His face was drawn, his eyes weary, yet there was relief in his voice as he greeted us.
Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, you cannot know what comfort it gives me to see you. The professor has been different again since I last wrote. More violent in mood, more secretive. The dog has been chained, but even so, there was an encounter last night that left Miss Edith nearly fainting.
We shall learn the truth soon enough, said Holmes. Lead the way, Mr. Bennet.
We walked through quiet, tree-lined lanes until we came to a handsome Georgian house standing a little apart from the college buildings, its ivy-clad walls suggesting the peace of scholarly life. Yet as we entered the iron gate, I felt, as I often have in the presence of strange cases, that peculiar tension, as though some invisible wire vibrated between the seen and the unseen.
Note, Watson, murmured Holmes, the gravel path, 2 sets of footprints, both fresh, one firm and heavy, the professor's, the other lighter and irregular. They circle the house. A restless mind leaves restless traces.
Mr. Bennet ushered us through a polished oak door into a study that bore all the marks of scientific toil, shelves laden with microscopes, skulls, flasks, and anatomical charts. Amid these relics of intellect stood a portrait of a young woman, fair and gentle-faced.
That is Miss Edith Presbury, said Bennet softly. She will be here presently. I fear for her health, gentlemen. She scarcely sleeps.
Compassion is a noble weakness. Mr. Bennet, said Holmes, his eyes flicking to the man's troubled expression. But do not let affection blind observation.
At that moment, the door opened and Miss Edith entered, a graceful young lady in pale grey silk, face pained but composed. She greeted us with the quiet dignity of one accustomed to restrain her emotions. Now,
Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I thank you for coming. My father is not aware of your visit. He imagines Mr. Bennet has invited friends to stay. I pray you will use discretion.
You have my assurance, Miss Presbury, said Holmes gravely. You must tell us, without fear or reservation, exactly what has occurred.
I hardly know how to speak of it, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Oh, my father, once so calm, so gentle, has become a stranger. Has become a stranger. He paces the corridors at night, muttering in a tongue I do not understand. Twice I had seen him crawling. Yes, crawling upon hands and knees through the shrubbery as though some dreadful instinct compelled him. When I called out, he turned upon me with a face I shall never forget, wild, distorted, and with eyes that shone like an animal's in the dark.
why Bezak? The poor girl covered her face for a moment, and I could see her whole frame shudder. Holmes, though motionless, regarded her with an expression of the deepest sympathy.
Miss Presbury, said he gently, there is no shame in speaking the truth. Have you noticed any fixed hour for these nocturnal wanderings?
Always near midnight, sir. He keeps his room locked until then, but I have heard him open the window and drop softly into the garden below.
Ah, the same window Mr. Bennet mentioned. Has he ever spoken of his journey to Prague?
He told us it was purely scientific, that he wished to consult Professor Moritz of the university there upon a new form of nerve stimulant, but since his return, his manner has been changed beyond belief.
A stimulant, you say? I exclaimed. Then perhaps the explanation is simpler than we fear. Some foreign chemical experiment gone awry.
Holmes raised a finger for silence. Watson, we must remember that in science as in crime, the simplest explanation is often the least probable. Mr. Raban, hi! Bennet, you say the professor keeps a locked box.
Yes, Mr. Holmes. He carries the key upon his watch chain and never lets it from his sight. I believe it contains that phial I mentioned. Timmy Lickney!
Then it is to the box that we must turn our attention. For now, however, we must first establish the pattern of his behavior. I propose we remain here tonight as your guests. May I rely upon your cooperation?
Entirely, sir. The professor retires at 10. After that, you may observe unseen from the garden window.
Miss Edith looked both relieved and apprehensive, as though the mere presence of Holmes brought both hope and dread of revelation. When she withdrew, I turned to my companion. Holmes, I said, surely this points to some mental disorder. His age, the secrecy, the bursts of energy, it might be mania.
Perhaps. And yet mania leaves certain traces which are absent here. Note how methodical the man remains, his locked door, his precise concealment. No, Watson, I suspect calculation rather than madness.
You mean deliberate experiment?
Exactly. We are dealing with a scientist who has become his own subject. How?
The afternoon passed in heavy stillness. Holmes, with his lens and notebook, examined every inch of the study. I paused long before the desk, running his thin fingers along the edge.
Observe, Watson. Faint scratches upon the wood, parallel, evenly spaced. The marks of claws, perhaps?
Claws, I repeated incredulously. Surely you jest.
I never jest with facts, my dear fellow. Whether human nails, grown unnatural, or something more exotic, that we shall see.
At dusk, Mr. Bennett showed us to our chamber, which overlooked the garden and the professor's wing of the house. The night came on swiftly, a pale moon rising over the college roofs. From below drifted the faint rustle of leaves, and once, a low growl, the chained wolfhound protesting in his sleep.
That dog knows more than any of us, Holmes whispered. Mark me, Watson. When the hour strikes 12, we shall have our first proof.
And so we waited, the lamp extinguished, our faces pressed to the open casement. The house lay steeped in silence, broken only by the ticking of a distant clock. Then, just as the last chime of midnight faded, a shadow stirred within the garden below. Out from the ivy-blackened wall emerged a figure, bent, creeping, grotesque. The moonlight caught the gleam of white hair, the outline of a dressing gown. It was Professor Presbury. On all fours, he moved swiftly across the lawn, his limbs uncannily supple, his head turning from side to side with an alertness that made my blood run cold. Suddenly, from the kennel, Shaft and fear, the wolfhound Roy gave a savage bark and hurled himself against his chain. The figure froze, turned toward the sound, and in that instant the face was revealed. The features were those of a man, yet twisted, convulsed, and strangely simian in aspect. The eyes glowed, the lips drew back in a snarl. Then, with a bound, the creature was gone, vanished among the trees like a phantom. Good heavens, Holmes, I whispered, scarcely breathing. Was that human?
Human, yes, but only just, murmured Holmes. The creeping man, Watson, we have seen him with our own eyes.
What devilry can account for such transformation?
That, my dear fellow, is what we shall learn when we open the box. Tomorrow, before dawn, I shall have a closer look at the professor's study. Till then, silence.
We sat long after that, unable to speak, listening to the restless pacing of the dog below and the distant hoot of an owl. And so ended that night, The first act in one of the strangest dramas ever played out beneath the quiet roofs of Cambridge. Dawn broke pale and chill across the lawns of Cambridge, washing the college towers in ghostly silver. The events of the night still clung to my thoughts like a fever dream. The image of that creeping figure, half man and half something unspeakable, had left me restless and wide awake long before the morning bell. Holmes, as ever, was already dressed, his face calm, but his eyes alive with a curious brightness.
Sleep, my dear Watson, is a luxury we cannot afford, said he, tying the knot of his cravat with the precision of a surgeon. While others dream, the world changes shape. Let us see what new form the truth has taken since midnight.
You mean to search the study? I asked, still unsettled by the recollection of what we had witnessed.
Precisely. Our host and his household are still abed. Mr. Waste, Bennett, loyal as he is, would hardly sanction what I propose, yet the cause of science and of sanity demands boldness.
Followed him down the carpeted stairs. The house was steeped in silence, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. The study door yielded softly to Holmes's deft touch. Once within, he closed it behind us and motioned me to keep watch by the window. The morning light filtered through drawn curtains, illuminating dust motes and the scattered instruments of research, retorts, pipettes, and half-filled jars whose labels gleamed faintly: adrenal extract, cerebral tissue, simia rugosa.
Holmes bent at once to the desk. His movements were swift, delicate, noiseless. With a small tool from his pocket case, he turned the keyhole of the bureau where, according to Bennett, the professor's secret box was kept. A click sounded, faint as the sigh of a sleeping child. Watson, he murmured, observe the economy of mechanism. A man accustomed to locks such as this must open and close them often.
The drawer slid open, revealing the object of our search, a small cedar box, polished and fitted with brass corners, the very type used for delicate instruments. Upon the lid were the initials C, P, and below them, faintly engraved, the word Prague. The key? I whispered.
Still upon his chain, no doubt, said Holmes, producing instead a slender wire. But such trifles seldom impede the curious.
He worked deftly, and in a moment the box sprang open. Inside lay a phial of clear liquid, stoppered with wax. Beside it, a folded sheet of foreign letter paper. Holmes took up the latter and scanned it swiftly.
As I thought, the handwriting is continental, the signature 1H. Lowenstein. Do you recognize the name, Watson?
It rings faintly in my mind. Was he not the biologist who claimed to have discovered a serum capable of restoring youth?
The same. A man expelled from the University of Prague for conducting experiments upon apes with W. Hat he termed hormonal rejuvenation. Listen to this. To Professor Presbley, I send you herewith the second supply, as per your request. Use with caution. The effect upon the simian subjects exceeded all expectation. But note that excessive dosage induces violent and bestial behavior. Awaiting your report. H. Lowenstein.
Good heavens, I exclaimed. Then the professor has been injecting himself with this infernal compound.
It would appear so, said Holmes quietly, holding the phial up to the light. Note its viscosity, Watson, faintly opalescent. The substance contains, I would wager, extracts derived from anthropoid glands. A stimulant indeed, but one that awakens instincts long buried in the evolutionary graveyard.
Then his transformations, his nocturnal prowling, are the symptoms of this hideous regression.
Precisely. Man, in his arrogance, sought to snatch at the secret of eternal vigor, and found instead the animal within. This, my dear Watson, is the literal reversion of man to the ape.
We replaced the paper and closed the box just as the sound of footsteps echoed faintly in the corridor. Holmes gestured sharply. In an instant, we had resumed our positions. I at the window, he bending as though to examine a microscope slide. The door opened. It was Trevor Bennett.
Mr. Holmes, you are early abroad. I feared you had not slept.
On the contrary, Mr. Bennett, I found the morning light too enticing for sloth, said Holmes lightly. I was examining your employer's instruments, a remarkable collection.
Indeed, sir, he spares no expense. But I must warn you, he is abroad in the garden already. I saw him from my window not 10 minutes ago, moving toward the kennels. Shall we join him?
By all means, said Holmes, rising swiftly. Come, Watson. Perhaps daylight will lend a more rational air to our midnight visitor.
We stepped out into the garden. The morning was bright now, the dew glistening upon the leaves. By the hedge near the kennels, Professor Presbury stood, a tall man with silver hair and a commanding presence, his features handsome but drawn. At first glance, one would have taken him for the very image of cultivated intellect. Only the restless flicker of his eyes betrayed something amiss.
Mr. Bennet, he said sharply, you did not inform me we were to have visitors.
Forgive me, sir. These are Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson of London, friends who take an interest in scientific matters.
Holmes bowed with courtly grace.
On honor to meet the celebrated Professor Presbury. Your researches into the nervous system have long been my admiration.
The professor's gaze softened momentarily. You are familiar with my work. That is rare outside academic circles. Yes, the coordination of reflex and will, a fascinating region. Sir, it is not theory but experiment that advances mankind. The body must be the laboratory of the spirit.
As he spoke, a strange excitement kindled in his eyes. His voice, at first resonant, grew guttural, the words tumbling with a fervor that bordered on mania. Then, catching himself, he laughed softly and turned toward the kennels where the wolfhound Roy lay chained.
There, Roy, he said in an odd coaxing tone. We are friends again, are we not? The faithful beast has misunderstood his master, eh?
Go, but the dog shrank back, growling deep in its throat. The hair bristled along its spine. The professor stepped closer, extending his hand. Suddenly, the animal lunged, the chain clanking taut, its teeth snapping inches from the man's wrist. Presbury recoiled, his face contorted, not in fear, but in a kind of unholy rage.
Down, brute, he cried, stamping his foot. Down, I say.
Come away, sir, said Holmes firmly, stepping forward. The creature is not in his right senses.
Not in his senses, sneered the professor. Perhaps he perceives more than you, Mr. Holmes. Animals, yes, they know what men are too blind to see.
He turned abruptly and strode toward the house. I caught a glimpse of his face. As he passed, flushed, trembling, the pupils dilated unnaturally. Once his eyes followed him keenly.
There goes a man at war with his own blood, he murmured. Did you observe the fingers, Watson? Slightly bent, with an abnormal curvature of the nails.
You mean as though they were claws?
Just so. The physical transformation is incomplete, but unmistakable. The stimulant has altered not only his manner, but his structure. I have seen similar tissue changes in certain pathological cases of degeneration, though never so rapid.
Mr. Holmes, said Bennet, pale to the lips, what are we to do? If this continues...
We must first remove the source. That phial must be destroyed. But it must be done without alarming him. The shock might be fatal. Tonight, when he retires, I shall take it.
And if you resist? I asked.
Then we must trust to our combined strength and to Roy if need be. The beast's instinct may yet serve us better than our own.
The rest of that day passed under a cloud of dread. The professor secluded himself in his study. Once, through the half-open door, I saw him lift the phial and gaze at it with reverent awe, as though it were a sacred relic. His lips moved in whispered ecstasy. Then he locked the box and placed it again within the drawer. As night fell, Holmes and I took our positions once more at the window. Quote, the moon hung high, a pale sentinel over the sleeping gardens. Inside, the house lay silent. Then, a creak of floorboards, a faint rustle, the door of the professor's room opened. A shadow passed swiftly along the corridor. Holmes touched my arm and rose.
Now, Watson, the moment of truth.
We slipped down the stairs, silent as ghosts, and entered the study. Holmes went straight to the drawer, his hands steady, his eyes alight with grim purpose. The box opened easily, too easily. It was empty. He has taken it, I whispered.
Then heaven help us all, Holmes replied.
Even as he spoke, there came from outside a sound so dreadful that the blood froze in my veins. A long animal scream, neither wholly human nor beast. It rose, fell, and rose again in a hideous crescendo. Dogs, furious barking, answered it from the yard. Holmes sprang to the window. I followed, and there, under the silver flood of moonlight, we saw the figure of Professor Presbrey bounding across the lawn with inhuman agility, his body twisted, his arms swinging like those of an ape. The wolfhound broke its chain and leapt upon him, and man and beast rolled together in the grass, snarling, grappling, indistinguishable in their fury. Come, Watson, cried Holmes, seizing his stick. We must save him from the beast and from himself, and we rushed into the night toward the scene of that unearthly struggle. The chill of that moonlit air struck cold upon my face as Holmes and I dashed across the dew-silver, D-lawn. Before us, the two shapes writhed in the half-light. The one human, Tablino, and this one human, the other brute, locked in a furious contest of strength and instinct. The growls, the hoarse cries, the labored panting filled the night with dreadful sound. For one instant, it seemed that nature herself had turned savage beneath our civilized skin. Holmes, for heaven's sake, take care, I cried as we neared the struggling figures. The dog's teeth gleamed white in the moonshine, and the professor, his dressing gown torn to ribbons, struck at the animal with the strength of frenzy.
Watson, the leash upon the ground, shouted Holmes.
I seized it and threw it across the wolfhound's neck, dragging back with all my strength. The creature released its hold reluctantly, growling and straining, its wild eyes fixed upon its master. For a moment, all was confusion. Holmes bending over the fallen man, I restraining the maddened animal, the garden echoing to the ring of voices and the distant alarm of servants hurrying from the house.
Quickly, Watson, your medical skill is needed. Holmes's tone cut through the tumult. The professor breathes, though faintly. We must get him within before any further scandal arises.
Between us, we lifted that limp, quivering form. The professor's body was drenched in perspiration. His hands, clawed and trembling, still twitched with spasmodic energy. His pulse fluttered wildly beneath my fingers, like that of a creature exhausted by unnatural exertion. Emily's tight. With Bennett's help, for the poor fellow had run to us, half beside himself with fear. We bore the professor up the steps and into his study. How desired him upon the couch, while I fetched my medical bag. The servants, white-faced, clustered in the corridor, but Holmes dismissed them with a firm gesture.
Mr. Bennet, said he, see that no one enters this room. Your master's life and reputation depend upon discretion.
I understand, Mr. Holmes, the young man replied hoarsely. But tell me, is he dying?
No, said Holmes, his eyes keen and steady. He is awakening, though from what manner of dream only the fates can tell.
I administered a draught to steady the professor's pulse. Gradually, his breathing deepened, his lips moved, his eyelids fluttered open. The wild light that had burned there before was gone, replaced by confusion and fear.
Where am I? He muttered faintly. What has happened?
You are among friends, sir, I said gently. You have suffered a collapse, but you are safe now.
It will be best, Professor, said Holmes, stepping forward, if you tell us frankly all that you have done. Your secret is known to us, though only to save you from its consequences. Axi.
At these words, the old man's eyes widened with a look of terror and shame. He raised himself upon one elbow, trembling violently. You have been spying upon me.
Observing, sir, not spying, Holmes replied quietly. Observation is the province of science, and, as you know, science without conscience is but the ruin of the soul. The phial, Professor, what was in it?
For a moment he was silent. Then, with a sigh that seemed to drain the life from him, he sank back. You know already, he said bitterly. Why should I conceal it? It was youth, Mr. Holmes, youth in liquid form, youth distilled from the vitality of lower creatures. Not gone weary, old, forgotten. My hand trembled at the scalpel. My students whispered of decline. And then came Lowenstein's letter. His promise that the cells of the anthropoid could restore what time had taken.
Good God, sir, I exclaimed. Did you not see the peril of such madness?
Madness, he echoed, his voice rising, towards genius, to graft the vigor of the ape upon the intellect of man, to conquer decay, to prolong knowledge. At first the effects were miraculous. My sight cleared, my strength returned, my mind burned with energy. But then his voice faltered, his hands clenched convulsively. Then came the dreams, the crawling, the hunger for the dark.
You were warned by Lowenstein himself, said Holmes coldly. The letter we found in your desk spoke of danger, of bestial transformation.
I thought myself stronger than his subject, murmured the professor. I was a man of reason, not an ape in a cage. But the second dose, it was stronger, far stronger. After that, I remembered nothing, only that the night called to me and that I could not rest within walls.
He buried his face in his hands. And the sight of that proud man broken by his own ambition filled me with pity. Holmes stood over him, silent, his expression grave and compassionate. Holmes!
Professor, said he at last, the law of evolution cannot be forced. Nature, when tampered with, retaliates. You have trodden upon the frontier that divides man from beast, and the border, once crossed, may not easily be regained.
Then I am lost, the old man whispered.
Not lost, said Holmes, but warned. The substance must be destroyed utterly, and you must swear upon your honor as a man of science never to seek its like again.
I swear it, said the professor feebly. Only see that my daughter never knows.
She shall hear only that her father was overworked and ill, said Holmes, turning to me. Watson, you will see to his recovery?
Gladly, I said. A few weeks of rest and proper care may restore him if the effects of that poison do not linger.
They will fade, said Holmes quietly. The blood cleanses itself, as the conscience does, slowly but surely.
At that moment, the door opened softly and Miss Edith entered. Her face was pale as death.
Father, she cried, rushing to his side. Oh, father, what has happened? They would not tell me, only that you were hurt.
My child, said he, taking her hand weakly, forgive me, forgive me. I have been foolish, an old man's vanity no more. These gentlemen have saved me.
Thank heaven, she whispered, her tears falling freely. And you, Mr. Holmes, how can I ever thank you?
By forgetting, Miss Presbrey, said Holmes gently. And there are truths that burden the heart more than ignorance ever could.
She looked at him with wonder, perhaps sensing that beneath those calm words lay a depth of compassion few ever saw in my friend. Then, turning to her father, she knelt beside him, and for a while the room was silent save for the soft sound of her weeping.
Holmes walked to the window, drew the curtains aside, and gazed out at the dawn that now glimmered over the trees. The wolfhound lay near the gate, watchful but calm, its chain refastened. Faithful creature, he murmured. He knew the truths before any of us. The animal fears its own likeness when it sees it. That is nature's warning.
And what of Lowenstein? I asked. Shall he not be exposed?
He is beyond our reach, said Holmes. The continent protects its philosophers of crime. But mark my words, Watson, knowledge without humanity is a weapon sharper than any dagger. Some day, another will rediscover what Lowenstein made and perhaps use it upon the world.
Heaven forbid, I murmured.
Heaven forbids nothing, Holmes replied, with that melancholy smile I knew so well. It merely observes.
For 2 days thereafter, we remained in Cambridge, while the professor slowly regained his reason. He remembered little of his nocturnal life, save that it haunted his dreams. The phial, at Holmes's insistence, was taken into the garden and poured upon the earth, where its drops hissed faintly as though consumed by the soil. Thus ends one of the strangest chapters in the book of human vanity, said Holmes, watching the last of it vanish. Let the ground keep what heaven will not.
Mr. Holmes, said Bennet, who stood beside us, you have saved not only his life, but his soul. I owe you more than I can ever say.
You owe me nothing, Mr. Bennet. Guard Miss Presbrey's peace, and that will be thanks enough.
That night, as we sat by the dying fire in our guest chamber, Holmes seemed unusually reflective, and the shadows flickered over his sharp features, and his pipe sent thin spirals of smoke drifting toward the ceiling. You are thoughtful, Holmes, I said.
I was thinking, Watson, of the gulf between intellect and wisdom. Man is forever climbing toward the heavens, and yet in his eagerness he often reaches downward instead. The creeping man, my dear fellow, is not merely a curiosity of science. He is a symbol of mankind itself.
And yet, I said, perhaps in learning the limits of his reach, man learns also humility.
Perhaps, said Holmes softly, but humility, like virtue, is seldom inherited. Each generation must learn it anew, and often through folly.
He leaned back, eyes half closed, and the faint smile that played upon his lips seemed both weary and wise. Thus ended that long and terrible night, a night when knowledge turned to madness and reason bowed before instinct. Sing of the Nongas, it was a week later when Holmes and I found ourselves once more in our familiar sitting room at Bake, our street. The November mist lay thick upon the city, and the muffled sounds of carriage wheels upon wet cobbles rose faintly through the fog. Our adventure in Cambridge had ended, yet its impression lingered in my mind with that strange fascination which all of Holmes's cases possessed, a mingling of horror, wonder, and reverence for the mind that could decipher the very mysteries of nature herself. Holmes sat before the fire, his long, lean figure wrapped in his dressing gown, his pipe between his fingers. He had been silent for some time, save for an occasional soft exhalation of smoke, which hung like ghosts above the hearth. At length he spoke.
Watson, said he quietly, it's darn dumb. Have you considered how narrow is the margin between sanity and savagery?
I have indeed, said I. Since our visit to Professor Presbury, I have thought of little else. That a man of intellect, a man whose life was given to science, should so far forget reason as to turn himself into a beast is a lesson that chills the blood.
Ha! But it was not reason that failed him, Holmes returned. It was wisdom. There is a gulf between the two, my dear Watson. Reason is but the mechanism of the mind. Wisdom is the restraint of the soul. The one discovers, the other forbids.
And yet, I ventured, is not discovery itself the purpose of knowledge?
It is, when guided by conscience. Science, ungoverned, is like a sword without a hilt. It wounds the hand that wields it. The professor sought youth, and in his quest he found the savage ancestor that sleeps within us all.
Holmes leaned forward as he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. The firelight glowed upon his sharp features, throwing deep shadows beneath his eyes.
Consider it, Watson. What is man after all but the heir of brute creation? A thin veneer of civilization overlays instincts older than the pyramids. Strip away the restraint of habit or conscience, and behold the creeping man, not a monster from legend, but the human creature laid bare.
Then, said I, you believe that what we saw was not merely a chemical reaction, but a reversion, a step backward along the path of evolution?
Precisely. The professor's injections, derived from the vital essence of an anthropoid, did more than stimulate his body. They awakened the primal memory in his blood. Each of us carries within him the record of his ancestry, written not in words, but in nerves and bone. It needs but a spark, chemical or moral, to rekindle it.
I shuddered. Holmes, do you think such experiments might ever be repeated?
Beyond doubt, he replied gravely. There will always be minds that would rather conquer than understand. Yet mankind is fortunate in this, that folly, like disease, carries within it the seeds of its own destruction.
He fell silent again, his gaze upon the fire. I watched him, struck by the strange duality of his nature, the relentless logician and the man of deep moral vision. To the world, he was a cold machine of deduction. To me, he was also a philosopher, one whose reasoning touched upon the very soul of humanity.
A letter for you, Mr. Holmes, said Mrs. Glaines. Hudson, entering softly with her usual air of quiet respect. It was delivered by the afternoon post.
Thank you, Mrs. Hudson, said Holmes, taking it. Set the tea upon the table, if you please.
He broke the seal and unfolded the paper. I saw a flicker of recognition cross his face.
From Mr. Trevor Bennett, he said. Our young friend writes that the professor's health improves steadily. He remembers little of the darker episodes. A merciful lapse, for memory in some cases is a form of punishment.
And Miss Presbury?
She is well, and her father has consented to her marriage with Bennett, Wah! It is a happy ending, Watson. Rare in our trade.
Indeed, said I, smiling. And does the professor still teach?
No, Holmes replied. He has resigned his chair. He writes that he spends his days in the garden cultivating roses. An occupation less brilliant, but infinitely more human.
A blessed exchange, I murmured.
Yes, said Holmes softly. He sought to conquer time. He has learned instead to live within it.
For a while we sat in companionable silence. The fog thickened beyond the window, and the flicker of the gas lamps cast long, wavering reflections upon the curtains. The faint rattle of a hansom in Baker Street sounded like the heartbeat of the sleeping city.
Watson, said Holmes suddenly, I'm thinking. Do you ever reflect how curious it is that mankind's greatest peril lies not in what is unknown, but in what he presumes to know?
I confess, I said, I had not thought of it so.
It is the presumption, not the ignorance, that breeds disaster. The professor did not err through want of intellect, but through excess of confidence. The fool leaps without seeing. The arrogant man leaps because he believes the abyss will respect him.
And yet, I said thoughtfully, without the courage to leap, man would never have advanced at all.
Holmes smiled faintly. True, the balance lies in knowing when to leap and when to kneel.
I could not help but admire the depth of the man. Though his life was devoted to logic, he never failed to discern the moral beneath the mystery. For him, deduction was not merely the art of solving crimes, but the instrument of understanding the human heart. Clock upon the mantel chimed 8. Holmes rose, stretched his limbs, and crossed to the window. He drew back the curtain and looked out upon the fog-bound street.
There is something soothing in London mist, he said. Oh, ooh, it hides the ugliness of the world and lends beauty to its mystery. Perhaps that is why I prefer it to sunshine.
You, Holmes, said I, prefer anything that can be analyzed.
Perhaps, he replied with a smile, but I have sometimes thought that mystery itself is the final truth, that the universe was meant to remain partly veiled, lest man, in uncovering it entirely, lose the wonder that gives him purpose.
You speak almost as a poet.
A detective, my dear Watson, must be half poet, or he will never understand man's motives. The poet sees the world as it might be, the detective as it must be. Between them lies truth.
He turned from the window and his eyes met mine. You will record this case, I suppose? I already have, said I, but I shall withhold it until many years have passed. The world is not ready to hear of men who would turn themselves into beasts.
Quite right, said he approvingly. Humanity must learn humility before it may safely read its own reflection.
He resumed his seat, refilled his pipe, closed his order, and the familiar cloud of blue smoke rose once more between us. The fire crackled softly, the fog pressed against the window panes, and for a moment all was still, the calm that follows the storm of revelation. Holmes, I said after a pause, do you believe that evil can ever be fully eradicated?
No, he answered simply. Evil is but ignorance acting with intent. You may cure ignorance, but intent is the child of will. The best we can do is to illuminate and to forgive.
Then you forgive the professor?
Entirely. He sinned through pride, not malice. And pride, Watson, is the first shadow cast by light.
There was such gentleness in his tone that I felt my heart warm toward him. For all his cold precision, Sherlock Holmes was, at his core, a man of deep compassion, one who pitied even those whom justice condemned. The evening wore on. Dart! Outside, the fog grew denser, swallowing the street lamps, one by one, until only our little hearts seemed to resist the encroaching gloom. Holmes leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, the faintest trace of a smile upon his lips.
Elementary, Watson, he murmured at last. Why, he murmured at last.
What is Holmes?
That man's highest ambition is always to become more than he is, and yet, in striving, he risks becoming less. The professor's tragedy was not that he failed to rise, but that he forgot how easily one may fall.
A lesson, I said. that I shall not forget.
Nor I, he replied softly. Now, my dear fellow, if you would be so good as to pass the tea, we shall leave evolution to Darwin, and content ourselves with the eternal mystery of Mrs. Lyst's Hudson scones. Whash!
I laughed, and the sound seemed to dispel the somber air that had settled over us. Thus, in that simple domestic moment, the dark shadows of the creeping man faded into memory, leaving behind only the quiet triumph of reason and friendship. As I write these lines, years after that strange episode, I recall with gratitude the mind that illuminated so many mysteries and the heart that sought justice, not vengeance. To the world, he remains the great detective. To me, he was, and ever shall be, my dear friend, Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes.